Hey, what's going on, everybody? In today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys my power rankings for the 2023-2024 NFL season. This is going to be the preseason or week one ratings for me. Now, of course, if you guys want me to use this list over and over again and you want me to continue this series, I will. And I already have my mock power or week two power rankings with the, up and down arrows. However, we are going to be going over this one first. And I'm not going to make this as long as my previous power rankings last year, which was like over 30 minutes. I'm going to try to get this close to under 15 minutes as possible. So, once again, these are subject to change. They're just my opinions on this team. You might be looking at this list now and being like, he's crazy, or you might be agreeing with me. These are all subject to change. These are just how I think that these teams are right now before we have seen them on an NFL field for this season. So now that's out of the way. Once again, don't get too angry at these rankings. They are very arbitrary until we can see them on the field. Let's go over the first group of teams, which is the bottom tier. The bottom three teams I have are the Cardinals, the Colts, and the Houston Texans. These guys they were either the first picks or they were either really early picks, such as the Houston Texans and the Colts and the Cardinals, or they're teams that just have worser depth charts, such as the Bucks or such as the Rams. This grouping of teams are teams that have potential, but right now are down. And this is not including the Cardinals, really. The Cardinals are standalone the worst team in the NFL. I think they have the worst roster. They have the worst future, and they're in a rebuilding phase. We've seen them trade a few players like Josh Dobbs, Isaiah Simmons. We've seen them trade a few players, and I think that continues to happen. Don't think that Kyler Murray is going to play a whole lot this year, and then they end up with the number one overall pick. So, and they also have a completely new coaching roster as well. So I have them firmly at 32. The Colts are another team. They revamped the coaching staff, drafted a rookie quarterback. They have a worser depth chart, especially on offense. And they're likely going to trade Jonathan Taylor. That's a question mark. We'll have to see where that is. But the Colts are a team that they have potential, but they were really bad last year with the same roster, and some younger teams got a little bit better, such as the Houston Texans, who I think did get better over the offseason. They hired DeMarco Ryan, who I'm very high on, as their head coach. They drafted C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson Jr. high in the draft, and they've made a few good offseason moves that I think will bump their team slightly over the Colts. However, they're still going to be like a 4 or 5 win team right off the bat. And then moving on to another team that I have in this grouping, which is the Rams. The Rams are a team that have just slowly dismantled the roster after their Super Bowl win in the 2021 season in 2022. And Matthew Stafford is coming off of a huge injury. Cooper Kupp is also coming off of a huge injury. They've lost Jalen Ramsey at this point. Their top 15 free agents, they only ended up re-signing one of them. Their roster's gotten a lot worse, and especially on defense, which used to be a top unit. Now it's likely going to be a bottom unit. And their offensive line, I would say, is one of the worst in the league. But at least they won the Super Bowl. And moving on to the Bucks, is another team that won the Super Bowl, but is another team that's super far down the list. Listen, the Bucks were bad last year, and even though they made the playoffs, they were 9-8. They were bad. They switched from Bruce Arians to Todd Bowles last year, which is a big coaching downgrade, and we could see that especially with the offense that struggled mightily in the run game and even in the pass game with Tom Brady. And now you move to Baker Mayfield, this is now going to be his third team in 2 years. So the Bucks aren't looking great, especially their defense. Their defense has gotten slowly regressed, especially within the secondary. Moving on to the Panthers, they're a team that is, I think, a little bit could be higher and could finish a lot higher than 27, but they're staying right here now because after we saw the preseason, their offense, I think, will struggle right off the bat. I don't think the Panthers are going to be very good within their first maybe 6 or so games. I could even see them maybe only getting 1 or 2 wins within that span because their offensive line's really rough. Bryce Young, he really had his introduction to the NFL. You have a whole new complete roster, especially on offense, where you added a ton of new skill position players, like in the receiver core and the tight end room, even in the running back room. You have so many new players and a new head coach in Frank Reich, who was just recently fired from the Colts. We'll have to see how that offense plays out right now. I think the defense will be the better unit this year. They've got a lot more depth. They've got a really good defensive line and a linebacker unit, but we'll see the offense struggle right off the bat, and I think that's why I'm having them a little bit lower, but I think they can end up a lot higher than 27. For the Vegas Raiders, they were bad last year with Derek Carr. They keep their head coach in Josh McDaniels, and they were right around in the 20s in the power rankings where they finished last year. So this is a good area because Jimmy G is, I guess they're on the same level as Derek Carr. I guess maybe it's not a quarterback downgrade, but it's not a quarterback upgrade at the end of the day. You didn't upgrade any coaching, and your defense is likely going to be either the worst or one of the worst defenses in the NFL. So I'm going to have them at 26, and I could see them falling to maybe a bottom 5 team by the end of the year. The Tennessee Titans are another team that I think I am very low on, surprisingly low. I know a lot of teams or a lot of people think that they could potentially be a playoff team in the AFC South, but I think the Jaguars clear them tenfold. The Jaguars have such a better offense, and they're likely going to have an uptick at defense, where the Titans last year were a lot lower on defense because of their pass defense. The rush defense was phenomenal last year. They were first in run D. However, they were 32nd against the pass, and teams are just going to throw the ball on them all the time. So with that major flaw in defense, and then with your offense having no identity in the passing game, Treylon Burks could have a breakout year. Chigozie Okonkwo could have a breakout year, but Ryan Tannehill's got 1 year deal left, and he could potentially be benched for one of the rookies if they have a weaker season with like Malik Willis or with Will Levis if they wanted to do that. So I have them at 25. I could see them bumping up to some teams that could have a down year, but right now I think their roster is it's in the beginning stages of what a rebuild is going to look like, kind of like how the Cardinals are out now. For the second grouping that I'm going to mention here, I guess the Tennessee Titans could be included in that, is the fringe playoff team if they have a really good season, but more like the middle range. It's more like the mid teams in the NFL, such like the Packers right now, the Bears, the Broncos, the Commanders. And starting off with the Packers, you're moving from you had an 8-9 season with Aaron Rodgers. Now you're moving to Jordan Love. You really didn't upgrade over the offseason too much. You're running it back with essentially the same roster. You have to account for that downgrade. Even though I think Jordan Love will have a good season, I think he has had enough development in the 3 years that he hasn't played to have a solid year. You have to account for that downgrade. So they could also be, I think they'll finish within the top 20, but right now I have to keep them a little lower. The Bears, they added a lot over the offseason. However, they were the first overall pick. They had the worst record in the NFL, but they upgraded so much over the offseason. New linebacking core, DJ Moore at wide receiver, which would really help Justin Fields. A boosted offensive line, and the defense got a little bit better, even though the defense is going to be one of the worst units in the league. It's still got a lot of growing pain to get, but their secondary is improved. I like where the Bears are going, especially on offense. I like what their identity is trying to be, and I think that DJ Moore, Justin Fields, I think that connection is going to be huge this year. I'm still going to have them at 23. Worst record in the league last year. We'll have to see how they perform. I'm going to be very high. I think this is even very high right now for the Bears. I think that many people could put them still within the bottom 20, but I have them a little higher. The Denver Broncos are another team that I have a little higher. I'm accounting for Sean Payton because coaching matters a ton in the NFL. They've had a lot of wide receiver injuries over the offseason. We've seen KJ Hamler be injured. We've seen Jerry Jeudy was carted off. Tim Patrick, I think, is still injured, or he tore his Achilles, I think. They've had a lot of wide receiver injuries over the offseason. And then Russell Wilson is starting to regress. We saw that a lot last year, and we'll have to see how that goes. But the defense, I would say, is a top 10 unit. Sean Payton should only help that unit, and Sean Payton will help the offense a lot. So I do have them at 22nd, but I think they're going to stay right around there the entire year. Last year, their offense was probably the worst in the league, all said and done, with their defense being one of the better units. I think the offense will take a step up, but they'll probably finish around like 7 wins. And right now, we don't know how that offense is going to look with Sean Payton, so I think it's safe to put them around in the 20s. The Commanders are a similar team. We don't know how their offense is going to look. They have a new quarterback with Sam Howell. They have a new offensive coordinator with Eric Bieniemy from the Chiefs. I think that duo could be pretty good, but I'm always in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking that Ron Rivera, what is he going to do? Is he going to get fired and Bieniemy become the head coach? Or is he going to stay around and they have a middling year again where they win 7-8 games and don't make the playoffs? We'll have to see how their offense performs with Sam Howell, and their defense, similar to the Broncos, I think is another top 10 unit. So that's why I have them right next to each other. With the Commanders slightly being higher because the NFC is going to be weaker and they're a slightly better team on offense because they've got a better receiving core and a better, I would say, offensive system. Then for the Browns, another team that's similar to the Broncos and the Commanders. We don't know how they're going to perform with Deshaun Watson. We saw it a little bit in the preseason against the Chiefs, where their offense looked very efficient. Even David Njoku scored a touchdown with Deshaun Watson at QB. But we didn't have a big enough sample size last year. Only 5 games, where his sample size was pretty bad to say. He had a career lows in almost every important statistical category, even rushing categories as well. So we'll have to really see with their offense. But they are going to compete in the AFC North. And their defense, we should see a lot of production from the defensive line because Jim Schwartz is now their defensive coordinator. So we'll have to see how they perform. I am low on them as of now. I've seen people put them within the top 16. I just need to see Deshaun Watson play in the regular season first. The New Orleans Saints, I think, are in the same barrier as well. I don't love Dennis Allen as their head coach. I know their defense was good in the back half last year, but in the front half, they were giving up 30-point, 40-point games, and he's a defensive mind guy. They only had excellent defensive games against lower teams or against like struggling offensive teams like the Bucs. That made their defense look a lot better. But the defense lost a lot of pieces this offseason, especially with their defensive line and their depth. But they did add offseason pieces like Derek Carr in the offseason. But I don't understand that identity. They moved away from Andy Dalton, who statistically had a better year in a smaller sample size, had a higher passer rating, had a higher touchdown to interception ratio. I'm pretty sure he was more accurate as well. You move from him to Derek Carr, who had a worse year with Devontae Adams. I don't know how that's going to play out. Maybe he'll do really well with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. We'll have to see how that goes because Derek Carr's moving from an offensive guy to a defensive head coach. We'll have to see how the Saints perform. Slightly over them, I have the Falcons. I like their outcome a lot more, but right now I'm going to keep them bracketed together because the Saints and the Falcons are the two biggest candidates to win the NFC South. So right now I'll have them together, but I think the Falcons will end up probably as a top 15 team by the end of the year because I think the rushing identity is going to be so important to their success. They can run literally 31 personnel every down if they wanted to. 31 personnel, if you guys don't know, that's basically when you have 3 running backs. So if you hear like 21 personnel, that's 2 running backs, 1 tight end. 31 personnel is 3 running backs, 1 tight end. And that goes same with flipped, like 12 personnel is 1 running back, 2 tight ends, such as that. What I mean is they're going to use the running backs a ton. They're probably going to have one of the highest running back usages in the league. They were second in rushing efficiency last year in EPA. They were third in rushing yards per game and third total rushing yards. And you just added that team. You added Bijan Robinson. So they're going to run the ball a lot. That's where they're going to keep their identity. Desmond Ridder is the wild card. If the passing game can be at least league average or close to league average, and the rushing game obviously is going to be so elite, their offense should be productive, especially within the goal line and the red zone. They have Tyler Algier, Cordero Patterson, Bijan Robinson. They have so much flexibility and creativity, especially with Arthur Smith at head coach, who was the offensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans, and that Tennessee Titans team ran the ball all day. So I think Bijan Robinson will have a crazy year. But the big wild card is their defense. They were bottom 5 last year. They added a lot of key defensive pieces like Jesse Bates. They traded for guys like Jeff Okuda. They signed some defensive players like Caden Ellis at the linebacking core, David Onyemata for the defensive line. They still got Grady Jarrett, even Calais Campbell. I think their defense will take a step up, and their offense obviously will be efficient, especially within the ground game. So I think they're going to jump the Saints, and I think they end up winning the division. I have the Minnesota Vikings super, super low. The reason for that is because the Vikings lost a ton of pieces over the offseason. They have a terrible defense, and by terrible, I mean they have a terrible defense. They were probably the worst defense against the pass outside of the Tennessee Titans, They allowed 30 points per game, almost. Not really 30 points per game, but they always would give up 30-point games and like 300-yard passing games, 450 total yard games to offenses like the Patriots, who were struggling a ton last year. But they did get Brian Flores as defensive coordinator, but I think the depth chart is just rough. They lost a ton of defensive pieces on the defensive line big time. They traded away Zadarius Smith. Is signing with Marcus Davenport is coming in as replacement, but they lost Dalvin Tomlinson as well, and they've lost a good amount of their linebacking core and secondary. Byron Murphy Jr. is the real only cornerback, and he's not even a boundary guy, but they're going to put him there. I don't know if Brian Flores is going to save that unit, but the offense as well lost a few pieces, like Dalvin Cook as their pure runner. Now they're going to have Alexander Mattson, who we'll have to see with that. I think Dwayne McBride is going to take a lot of the goal line work there. And then for the receiver core, they lost Adam Thielen, but they replaced him with Jordan Addison in the first round. That should be a good swap. He should probably have a good year as their second option, and then KJ Osborne. And then Justin Jefferson's the offensive player of the year. We already know about that. But I think that they're definitely not going to have as good as the year last year. They were immediately bounced out of the playoffs by the Giants, and they went 13-4. They were 11-0 in one-score games. That's just not going to happen again. I think that even potentially have a losing season, and I wouldn't have them over a good amount of the other playoff teams that were in the playoffs last year for the NFC. But moving over to my top 16, I have the New England Patriots. The Patriots are still a good team. We can't ignore the fact that Bill Belichick is an all-time head coach. He's going to put out a really good defense. And they also signed Bill O'Brien over the offseason instead of Matt Patricia, who was their offensive coordinator. And Matt Patricia was a defensive head coach and a defensive coordinator from the Jets. Now they're hiring an offensive guy. We'll have to see how the offense performs with Mac Jones, with that new offensive coordinator. They signed Juju Smith-Schuster to replace for Jacoby Myers. They signed Mike Gesicki instead of Jonnu Smith that they signed in 2020. Their offense, I would say, mainly retained the same, other than maybe flipping a couple of guys on the offensive roster. And their defense stayed mostly the same, other than flipping a couple of guys on the defensive roster over the offseason. So I'm going to have them right around that fringe playoff team. They went 8-9 last year. I think they go 8 or 7 wins this year. So I have them comfortably at 16 ahead of some of these other teams that are not quite on the roster, on the level that the Patriots are. I have the Giants slightly ahead of the Patriots. They're in the same level to me as a fringe playoff team. But in the NFC, a fringe playoff team is likely a wild card spot. The Giants are a good roster. They're a sneaky good roster. They're a really good culture. You can see it on the field. And Brian Daboll immediately flipped over that losing season roster to a playoff winning team. They won in the wild card and made it to the divisional against the Eagles. Crazy turnaround there. He's a phenomenal head coach, and Joe Schoen's also a good GM. I really like what the Giants are doing, especially for the future. But over the offseason, they made a little questionable moves. They signed Daniel Jones to a huge deal. They didn't sign Saquon to a large deal when he is the main offensive factor. They didn't get a wide receiver one, which I think that should have been their main mindset. But their defense is still really good. They drafted Deonte Banks, who I think will immediately step up. He fits that Wink Martindale system a lot with that press man ability. I like the Giants. I think they're going to make the playoffs probably again, but they have one of the hardest schedules in the league. It's going to be tough, but since they were already a playoff team, they're a top 15 team, and I don't think they took major regression to make me question them falling down too hard. The Pittsburgh Steelers I have at 14, and I think this is right around where I would put them. I think that their defensive roster, it really elevates their team and makes up for their offense. I'm not the biggest fan of their offense. Kenny Pickett, phenomenal preseason. He looks really good. I'm not the highest on Kenny Pickett. I don't think he has that next level arm talent that a top 10 quarterback would need to have. But he's similar to a guy like Dak Prescott or Kirk Cousins or somebody that just gets the job done. He's phenomenal when he when he gets out of the pocket and when he's throwing on the run. He's got great accuracy and good touch on the ball. I think that the offense will take a step up, but I don't know if the offense will take like a major step up. It's not going to be top 10 just because the system is not there. Like Matt Canada is not going to be like Andy Reid or Bieniemy. Nobody's asking him to be that, but he's never going to be like a top 10 offensive coordinator. So the Steelers' offense is always going to be limited in the back of my mind, but they have a good offensive roster. They built up their offensive line, drafted Broderick Jones in the first round. George Pickens and Deontay Johnson's a good receiver duo. Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington's a good tight end duo. And Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, that's a good running back duo. They've got a solid offense, but then their defense is the star of their team. They've got, you know, Cameron Hayward, TJ Watt. They've got they signed Pat Pete over the offseason. They drafted Joey Porter Jr. They have Minka Fitzpatrick at safety. They've got a good defensive roster. It was top 5 last year, or I think it was top 10. I don't know how the DVOA was, but I think it's a top 10 unit in the league. So I'm gonna have them at 14 right now. I wouldn't put them at top 10. I just don't think their offense is good enough to compare to the rest of the teams here, but I'm going to have them comfortably at 14, and I think they'll stay around there most of the year. For the Chargers, I think that they're a team that is going to fall down the rankings as we go along, but they're a playoff team, so they're obviously going to get a higher ranking for the preseason. I didn't love what they did over the offseason outside of signing Kellen Mond. I like that. I like that they got rid of Joe Lombardi, who is a checkdown master, to a player who wants to target the sticks, who wants to go deep, and who wants to uh, have explosive running backs, unlike Joe Lombardi, who primarily targeted Austin Eckler, who was probably one of the most overused players in the NFL, which is a state like it's a fact. He's not as efficient as he would be to get for a player to get 400 touches, and like he had 100 receptions last year. That's way too many for a running back, no less a wide receiver if he's not an elite receiver. So I think that the biggest thing for the Chargers offense that's going to change is they're going to target the deep more. They're going to use Justin Herbert's talent, especially with his arm talent. They're going to target Quentin Johnson, who they drafted in the first round, very deep. They're going to get Keenan Allen working at the sticks, and they're also going to get Mike Williams going. They're going to run a lot of go routes. They're going to run a lot of comeback routes, and they're not going to run a lot of check down to the running back routes. Austin Eckler will still get a lot of work, but I think that Isaiah Spiller and Joshua Kelly, I think they're going to get a lot more usage because Kellen Mond, what did he do last year? He had a goal line back and he had a speed back. And I think Joshua Kelly or Isaiah Spiller, one of those guys will be the speed back and get a good amount of work. While Austin Eckler, I know that a lot of you guys want to draft him in fantasy, but I would avoid him because I don't think he's going to get as many touches, which he shouldn't in this year. And I think their offense ultimately benefits from it. And their defense is similarly around the same as of last year. They didn't lose too many players, but they didn't really do over the offseason to go over that hurdle that I think they needed to, especially with Brandon Staley as a head coach, who I think is slightly limited. He doesn't have the best. He's not the best coach. He puts players in when he doesn't need to, such as like the week 18 when Mike Williams got hurt and was out for the playoffs. He's not the best with clock management, and he goes for it on fourth down a ton. He's got to learn to be more conservative in kicking field goals to earn his points. So I think the Chargers are slightly outside the top 10. I think their offense improves with Kellen Mond as their offensive coordinator, but I don't even think I would put them within the playoff teams for the AFC, which is just ultimately stacked this year. Moving on to the Detroit Lions, I think that I think they're slowly becoming one of the best teams in the NFC, and I would put them within the top 5 easily. They have such a phenomenal offense with Ben Johnson as their offensive coordinator. They've got such a good culture with Dan Campbell as their head coach. But their defense was the major problem. They allowed so many yards and so many points on defense. They did retain Aaron Glenn as their defensive coordinator, ex-Jets cornerback, but their defense should be maturing as they have Aiden Hutchinson in their second year, James Houston in his second year. They drafted linebacker Jack Campbell in the draft. That should hopefully solidify their middle linebacker position. They've got some good safeties as well. And they signed Cameron Sutton in the offseason to solidify their cornerback one. I think their defense should take a step up, but not a huge step up. Their defense won't be top 10, but I don't think it'll be bottom 5 like it was the majority of last year. But their offense was top 5 last year. I could see it immediately repeating this year. They still got Jared Goff. Instead of Jamal Williams, they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round. They have David Montgomery as running back. That running back duo is going to be very good this year. Still got Amon-Ra St. Brown. Still got a top 3 offensive line unit in the league. I love their offense a lot, and I think they're going to be a playoff team this year and win the NFC North as I have them over the Vikings. Trying to get through these top 10 quick. We all know the top 10 teams, but moving on to the Baltimore Ravens, who I have just outside of the top 10. I like the Ravens, what they're going to do on offense, and they hire Todd Monken as their offensive coordinator. They drafted Zay Flowers, brought in Odell Beckham Jr., and they, retained Lamar Jackson with a huge contract over the offseason. I like what they're going to do on offense. I think if Lamar Jackson's healthy, they are a top 10 easy unit on offense. And I think the receiver core is going to be very good this year, as they should increase their passing volume. And their running game is obviously a top 5 unit in the league, no doubt, with Lamar Jackson. But they should increase their passing volume a lot, because now they got Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham Jr., Mark Andrews, and Todd Monken loves his RPOs. And, at Georgia, they targeted Brock Bowers a ton. Todd Monken was the offensive coordinator at Georgia. So Mark Andrews could be in for a big year, because Brock Bowers won the tight end of the year award in college. And you've got Mark Andrews, who's a top 3 tight end. So expect Mark Andrews to have a huge year for any of you fantasy guys. And then on their defense, they have been losing. They are getting older. They have been losing a couple of guys, especially on their defensive line unit. I don't think they're going to generate a lot of pressure, because the defensive line unit's been losing guys. And they've drafted a few first rounders, but they really haven't worked out a ton. Their linebacking core is good. I love their addition of Roquan Smith last offseason. They signed him to a $100 million deal. Roquan Smith will be a monster at middle linebacker. And then you get Patrick Queen as your flex money linebacker per se. And then the cornerback unit, you lose Marcus Peters, but you still have Lattimore. Or no, not Lattimore. You still have Marlon Humphrey. You've got a good safety unit with Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams. So their secondary should be good this year. We'll have to see how the Marcus Peters he's declining athletically, so we'll have to see how their secondary performs this year. But moving on to my top 10, I think that these are all teams that I don't have to spend too much time on. The Jacksonville Jaguars, great team. They made a miraculous comeback against the Chargers. Had a great game against the Kansas City Chiefs in the divisional. They should be a phenomenal offensive team, and last year they were top 10 in my opinion, with Trevor Lawrence having his breakout year. Christian Kirk, massive year, and then you add Calvin Ridley to that receiver core. You have Evan Ingram at your tight end. You've got Travis Etienne as your running back. They have a phenomenal offensive team this year, and I think it'll be a top 5 unit probably. And Trevor Lawrence he gets some MVP votes as well. The defense is probably what's going to keep them outside of the top AFC teams. They have a super young unit, especially with their cornerbacks, with their defensive line pieces, and even at their linebacker group. So they have a young defense. We'll have to see how they perform this year with a lot of rookies who had their second year, like Devin Lloyd and the linebacker, Chad Muma as a linebacker, first overall pick Trayvon Walker, and Tyson Campbell. I think he's entering his 4th year, if I'm pretty sure. So we'll have to see how the Jacksonville Jaguars defense performs after this year, but I have no problems with their offense. It'll likely be a top 5 unit and a high-powered offensive unit, even adding Calvin Ridley to that unit. The Seattle Seahawks, they're one of my favorite teams that improved over the offseason. Geno Smith, great, got a big contract after he had his breakout year. Who saw that coming? Geno Smith, pinpoint accuracy last year, played extremely well with Pete Carroll. And you add to that unit Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is my second highest rated receiver in the class. He should be phenomenal out of the Z, which is the flanker, or out of the slot. You can move Tyler Lockett anywhere. They have one of the best receiving cores, possibly the best in the league now, with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. You can run 3 tight ends with Cody Parkinson, Noah Fant, and Will Dissly. They added Zach Charbonnet in the draft as your power back, and Kenneth Walker as your speed elusive guy. Their offense should be really good, and their offensive line should only mature with Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross, your 2 tackles, in their second year now in this system. The defense is what I'm more worried about, especially with the run game. They were a bottom 5 run unit or run defense unit in the league last year. They did add Jermont Jones for the interior, but they didn't add a good nose tackle or a good run plugger in the offseason. But they did add Bobby Wagner as their their linebacker. He's coming back to Seattle after being cut from the Rams. He should be a good run stuffer. He's declining athletically, so he won't be good against the pass. Jordan Brooks did tear his ACL. That's going to suck for the linebacker core. He was more your cover guy. But the secondary is what I'm more excited about. You drafted Devin Witherspoon 5th overall. He was a top 10 guy in my opinion. I think I had him 7th overall for the draft. And then you have Tariq Woolen. You have in the secondary Jamal Adams, Quandre Diggs, and you drafted Kobe Bryant in the 4th last year, who forced 4 fumbles. He should be your hit guy. They're really trying to rebuild their Legion of Boom out there in Seattle. But their secondary should be a very tough unit to get across. But I think teams can easily use their identity to just run the ball on them. The New York Jets, I have them coming in at 8. Without seeing them on an NFL field first, I have to put them under the rest of the proven and playoff AFC teams, especially within the AFC East. So I have them below, but I think they can end up as a top 5 team for the season. But I have them right now at 8. You go from a offensive unit that put up a good amount of numbers with Zach Wilson, Mike White, and Joe Flacco, the 3 worst qualified quarterbacks in the league. If you account for, I think it was like 100 snaps on PFF. They had all a passer rating under, I'm pretty sure, like 76. And Mike White struggled. He only had 1 great game. Zach Wilson obviously didn't have a good year again. You move from that quarterback room to a quarterback room with Aaron Rodgers, who in the last 3 years has won 2 MVPs. I know some people have a questionable opinion about him. He likely had his worst year in the NFL last year, but he did lose Devontae Adams over the offseason, and he's still one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the league. You had him to your offense. The offensive line is still rough. Injuries are a massive problem. They got to fix that offensive line, and hopefully it'll stay healthy for the rest of the year. But the biggest thing on the Jets is their defense. I think it's likely top 3, top 2, only behind maybe the 49ers and maybe the Eagles. The defense is just crazy. Their secondary is probably the best in the league with Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. They've got a phenomenal defensive line unit, especially with first-team All-Pro Quinnen Williams. You've got a good defensive line rotation. They should be a really good defense, and they're probably going to be one of the hardest teams to score on. I'm going to have the Dallas Cowboys over the Jets. I think that the Cowboys are a more proven team. They've got a great offense. They've got a good running unit with Tony Pollard. They've got a good receiver core with now Brandon Cooks. And you have CeeDee Lamb. You've got Dak Prescott at quarterback. He's very consistent as a borderline top 10 quarterback. And then the defense for them as well is just phenomenal with Micah Parsons, who I think is the defensive player of the year this year. You add Stephon Gilmore right next to Trayvon Diggs. That's going to be a really good duo, and they'll force a ton of turnovers. The safety group is pretty good with Donovan Wilson there, and the linebacking core with Leighton Vander Esch, who is retained, and the defensive line unit is very solid. Adding Mozzie Smith in the draft to hopefully be that run plugger. They should once again be a top 5 defense with Dan Quinn at defensive coordinator. They're a very safe team to put in the top 10. Moving the Miami Dolphins really high. I think that the Dolphins' offense is going to be cracked this year. I love Mike McDaniel as an offensive mind. I think Tua Tagovailoa is extremely underrated when he's healthy. I know a lot of people do not like Tua. I can't find a reason to not like him, especially a quarterback. He's got the touch. He's got the pinpoint accuracy. Maybe his arm isn't a top tier arm like Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, maybe even a Joe Burrow, but he's still got phenomenal touch, phenomenal accuracy, and he reads defenses extremely well for the complicated system that is Mike McDaniel's system. Very complicated. The receiver core is deadly with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. The running back room got better with Devon Achane, who is extremely fast. He ran a 4.3 at the combine. Your offensive line hopefully will stay healthy. I wouldn't say it's one of the top units in the league, but you did add Teron Armstead last year, who has been suffering with injuries over the offseason, I'm pretty sure. And the defensive unit get a whole lot better. They did trade for Jalen Ramsey, who has an MCL injury or a meniscus injury. I'm not sure which one. but he was carted off. He's likely going to miss 8 to 10 weeks. So that is a tough offseason loss. But they did have Vic Fangio as their defensive coordinator. That should immediately make their defense top 10. He runs a phenomenal system. We saw that with Denver when they consistently were a top 10 defense almost every year. So really like their defense. And moving on to the Buffalo Bills, moving on to the top 5. These guys are all contenders. These guys are all the top teams in the league. You know their name, you know how they perform, so I'll go over them pretty quickly. Buffalo Bills, top offense, top defense. They did lose some pieces over the offseason, but they added depth. But I think the Bills will struggle a little bit more, especially against the two teams that got really good over the offseason. They struggled against Miami Dolphins offense. They struggled against the New York defense. If you don't think they struggled, they did. The Dolphins put up 30-point games. In one game, they had Skylar Thompson, their third-string quarterback, who put up 30 points against that Bills defense. And Josh Allen had he had one passing touchdown to two or three interceptions or two interceptions against the Jets. But he did have 4 touchdowns to 4 total turnovers against the Jets defense, and they put up 17 points and 20 points respectively. In the passing game, they held him to under 200 passing yards in each game. So they should struggle against the best two teams that got better over the offseason in their division. But they were number 1 in point differential. Josh Allen is a top 3 quarterback in the league, top 4. Whatever you think about Jalen Hurts. And their defense is still a top unit, especially their secondary and their linebacking core with Matt Milano and their safety unit with Poyer and Hyde. However, they are getting older. They're both 32. We'll have to see how they perform with slight athletic decline. And we'll also have to see how Tre'Davious White returns. He didn't have a full season off his torn ACL, but he got better and more conditioned as the season went on, especially within the playoffs. But they usually get bounced out of the playoffs early outside of the divisional game with the Chiefs when they went blow for blow. They looked completely outmatched against the Bengals, and it looked like they were going to potentially lose against the Dolphins. We'll have to see. I think they'll still make the playoffs, but I don't know how early they're going to be out. But the Bengals, they made it to the AFC Championship twice in a row. They made it to the Super Bowl. Joe Burrow has a really good candidacy for the MVP. Jamar Chase has a good chance to win Offensive Player of the Year. They have a top 15, top 10 defensive unit with their linebacking core, great defensive line unit, solid secondary. They are losing Jesse Bates and Von Bell. That'll hurt their overall defense because teams are going to be able to target them deep a lot because Jesse Bates was their tried and true free safety who would force a lot of turnovers and who would guard at the deep ball a lot. They're going to be losing that, but they do have a first-round pick, Cam Taylor-Britt, who I think is moving to safety. So hopefully he'll be able to replace him. But their offensive unit is probably going to be either top 3 or top potentially 1 in the league with Joe Burrow at quarterback. San Francisco 49ers, the big question mark is quarterback. I think Brock Purdy is the clear number 1 in quarterback, but we don't know how early he's going to be back. He did play in the preseason, but that UCL is something to never count out. As a baseball player myself, people don't return from Tommy John too fast, especially when it's a bigger ball. Baseball, finer mechanics with Tommy John. Brock Purdy tore his UCL in the NFC Championship game. I think it's a 6-month turnaround. It's usually a year turnaround. So I think Sam Darnold will end up playing a good amount of games. They did trade Trey Lance, which is an all-time bad trade. But to ignore that, the quarterback is the biggest issue with this team. Or not issue, just question mark as of the first couple of weeks. But as they get Brock Purdy fully seasoned, ready to go, the team should just explode. They did so well with Brock Purdy when he played, and the defense, top 1 unit in the league. They are losing DeMarco Ryan as their defensive coordinator, but they've gone through 3 defensive coordinators now, and their defense has still been a top unit with Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, Tanalo Hufanga. Was a first-team All-Pro at safety, or was an All-Pro and a Pro Bowler. I didn't see that happening last offseason. They're just too good of a defense, and they're a good enough offense to where the quarterback it doesn't matter really who's their quarterback. They're going to still produce. They're going to still be a very efficient team. Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, they were the obvious two teams that made it to the Super Bowl. The Chiefs at 1 because they won, and the Eagles lost at 2. But Jalen Hurts put up a huge fight. They put up 35 points against the Chiefs. They did lose some defensive pieces like Javon Hargrave over the offseason, and they still re-upped. They re-upped a big time with Jalen Carter in the draft, and they re-signed both cornerbacks, James Bradbury and Big Play Slay of the offseason, which both of them could have been losses. That's awesome retaining them. Nakobe Dean will likely be the starting linebacker, and I think Miles Jack, if he's not retiring, I forgot which linebacker retired. They signed 3 in like a day. The linebacking core did lose TJ Edwards, who was a really good linebacker. He's going to the Bears. We'll have to see how that linebacking unit performs now with fresh players who haven't played in a year, or Nakobe Dean, who didn't play a lot last year. But I think the Eagles' defense will still be pretty solid. Big thing about their season or their offense or the big thing about their offseason as well, they did lose both coordinators with Shane Steichen going to the Colts and then Jonathan Gannon, defensive coordinator, going to the Arizona Cardinals. They have 2 new coordinators now. We'll have to see how they perform. And then the offense, still a top 5 unit. Jalen Hurts is phenomenal. They are playing a defensive row the first 8 weeks. We'll have to see how Jalen Hurts performs against top defenses. But I think he'll do really well. That rushing game will be phenomenal. The passing game will be phenomenal. I have no real worries about the Eagles. I think they're still the best team in the NFC, and I think they have a really good chance to make it back to the Super Bowl. The Kansas City Chiefs are the number 1 team in the NFL. I don't have to talk too much about them. Best offense in the league, good defense, and you have Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and Travis Kelce. And you have a top 2 offensive line, in my opinion. Their offensive line is crazy good as well. So that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts about these power rankings. Let me know your power rankings. And let me know if you guys want me to continue this series. As I will, I'll show you guys, or I'll continue the series. And, this is how it would look. And that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe as always. Follow my Twitter. Link is in the description, or Twitter, Alex Regan NFL. And I'll see you guys in the next one.